Luther Burbank, Half-Hour Experiments. Whether the growing of plants be taken up as a science, a profession, a business, or merely for recreation, there is ever present the need to understand nature's methods and her forces in order to be able to make use of them to guide them. The purpose of this booklet is to afford a glimpse of the interest and value of the works of Luther Burbank, the wizard of the plant world. In the new Burbank books are facts about plants stranger than fiction, expert guidance in every detail of plant culture, interpretations of the laws and principles of nature, with specific recommendations as to how nature's ways may be put to practical use for pleasure and profit, and the inspiration and priceless secrets of the world's foremost plant creator, the sum total of his unparalleled experience and skill. But remember that what is included here is only a taste, a thousandth part of the whole treasure that may be yours if you own the complete library. Half-hour experiments. What to work for in experiments with plants. The practical essentials of hand pollinizing. How to Burbank your geraniums. How to make old fruit trees young and productive. The ordinary garden methods may be had from any one of 100 sources. But practical and dependable guidance in the field of plant experimentation is most difficult to obtain. In this but partially explored field that offers unlimited possibilities for pleasure and profit, Luther Burbank is best qualified of all contemporary plant breeders to point the way to success. Appeal to authority in plant improvement means appeal to Burbank, the Dean of Plant Breeders. The half-hour experiments appearing in this booklet are from the works of Luther Burbank. They are experiments that you may actually put into practice in your garden or orchard, and may be relied upon as authentic. At the door. Flowers offer the most inviting field for the amateur, even while they still hold their full attraction for the practiced experimenter. There is opportunity for skill in the blending of different shades in a flower, far greater than the painter's skill in applying colors to the canvas. Even the flowers that grow beside my home are always undergoing observation and being tested as to their capacity for further education. So pictures taken in different seasons do not have the same appearance. At the moment, this beautiful rose has the place of honor as the decoration selected for the porch. Luther Burbank. The color illustration shows the door to Burbank's home in Santa Rosa. Does your own look anything like this? Have you exhausted all the possibilities for pleasure and beautiful results from knowing about and working with flowers? What to work for in experiments with plants. Nature has been carrying on selective, worldwide breeding of plants and animals on a constantly widening scale for millions of years, but nature does not care for sweet corn, thin-skinned, seedless, juicy oranges, head lettuce, self-blanching celery, double roses, or the farmer's crops of varied grains and potatoes, which now are, in most cases at least, 100 times as productive and of almost infinitely improved qualities. Man has, at first unconsciously and later consciously, produced all these marvelous improvements and 10,000 others, and is now making and will make improvements in everything, plant and animal, which is useful to him. Nature has time without limit, but man has immediate need for better and still better food and must take a hand in hastening and directing plant improvement. Immediate possibilities for plant improvement outnumber the improvements which have already been wrought, 1,000 to 1. It would be impossible here to begin to catalogue the improvements which can be wrought, improvements in size, shape, color, texture, juiciness, flavor, sweetness, or chemical content of fruits, improvements in the appearance, tenderness, taste, cooking qualities, and nutritive elements in vegetables, improvements in length and strength of fiber in cotton, flax, hemp, and in many other textile plants, improvements in the quantity and quality and color of grains, improvements in amount and value of the chemical content of sugar beets, sorghum, coffee, tea, and all other plants which are raised for their extracts, improvements all of them, which are capable of turning losses into profits, and of multiplying profits, instead of merely adding to them by single percents. Improving the yield, and consequently the usefulness and profit of existing plants, however, is but the beginning of the work before us. An almost equally rich field lies in saving plants from their own extravagances. Under this head might well come the large subject of bringing trees to early fruiting, or of greatly shortening the period from seed to maturity in shade and lumber trees. The rapid-growing walnut, and pineapple quince, and chestnut seedlings bearing at 6 months from the seed, stand forth as strong encouragement to those who would take up this line. Then there is the broad subject of adapting plants to special localities. The hop crop of California, the cabbage crop near Racine, Wisconsin, the celery crop near Kalamazoo, the cantaloupe crop at Rocky Ford and Imperial Valley, and the seed farms of California, all of these bear eloquent testimony to the profit of a specialty properly introduced. Yet we have not touched on the most interesting field in plant improvement, the production, through crossing, hybridizing and selection, of wholly new plants to meet entirely new demands. All of these things are as immediate in possibilities and consequences as transcontinental railroads were 50 years ago. All can be made to come about with such apparent ease that future generations will take them as a matter of course. The cost and the quality of everything that we eat and wear depends on this work of plant improvement. Luther Burbank. Volume I. p. 260 to 277. Among the outstanding methods of plant improvement are pollination, grafting, and budding. The first steps in practical work explained in this booklet are the methods Luther Burbank has successfully employed in thousands of separate experiments. The practical essentials of hand pollinizing. The essence of pollinizing is merely the transfer of pollen from the stamen of one flower to the stigmatic surface at the end or rarely at the side of the pistil of another. This is the work that is ordinarily accomplished by the insect. It is all that the plant experimenter accomplishes when he wishes to effect the crossing of different plants of the same species, or the wider crossings commonly called hybridizing, of different species. There is nothing occult in the practice of the bee or in the imitation of his work as practiced by the hand of the pollinizer. What is accomplished in each case is the purely mechanical transfer of a certain number of minute pollen grains from one place to another. Beyond that, everything depends on the vital activities of the plant tissues themselves. Specific methods are necessary to effect cross-pollinizing in the case of sundry types of flowers that have developed blossoms curiously modified as to form or details of structure. But the general processes of hand pollinizing as they apply to the chief flowers of the orchard and garden, may be stated in a few words. The essential thing is to secure a certain quantity of pollen, usually by shaking it from the flower on a watch crystal or other small receptacle, and to transfer this pollen to the receptive pistil of another flower either with the fingertip, which furnishes in general the most useful piece of apparatus, or with a camel's hair brush. It is desirable to cover the receptive portion, stigma, of the pistil fully with pollen, partly to ensure complete fertilization, and partly to prevent the vitiation of the experiment through possible subsequent deposits of pollen from another source. If the flower to be fertilized has stamens of its own, these should be removed before they are fully ripe, which is often a few hours or a day before the foreign pollen should be applied. This removal of the stamens may usually be done with a pair of small pincers. In case of flowers that have short pistils, the cherry, apple, and other orchard fruits being good examples, the unopened flower bud may be cut around at about the middle with a thin blade knife, the anthers being thus excised at a single stroke. So-called composite flowers, however, require special treatment. The daisy and the sunflower are familiar examples. Here the true flowers are very small and grouped in masses. Individual treatment is usually out of the question. The best method is to wash away the pollen with a carefully directed stream of water from a garden hose, or by spurting water from the mouth, after which the head of the pollinizing flower is rubbed against the one selected, thus effecting fertilization en masse. In exceptional cases it may be desirable also to cover the fertilized flower with a paper bag to prevent the visit of insects, but in practicing pollination on a large scale this may usually be omitted by those who have experience enough to recognize the hybrids from the others. If the stigma has been satisfactorily covered with pollen, it will present no exposed surface for the reception of other pollen grains. The rule is simply this: seek nature's plan and follow it. In other words, take a lesson from the bees, and pollinize the flowers somewhat as they do. Bear in mind the essentials of the process, which are the same for every flower. Study the mechanism of each new flower and adapt your precise method to the needs of the individual case. It does not matter just how the pollen reaches the stigma, provided it does reach it. Any amateur who wishes to test the matter may do so to his complete satisfaction by making the simplest experiment in cross-pollinizing and watching the growth of the hybrid his work brings. Fourth, a very short course of practice will give you the knack, and will lead to surprising, fascinating, and perhaps far-reaching results. Luther Burbank. Volume 2, p. 261 to 266. For an initial experiment, try hybridizing your geraniums, after reading Burbank's instructions in the following article. How to Burbank your geraniums. Why single out the geranium for your first experiment pollinizing? Burbank gives the following reasons for recommending the plant to his amateur disciples and suggests the possibilities in working with this common flower which almost everyone grows in his garden or window box. Some of my experiments in hybridizing have been conducted with the idea of producing fragrant races of geraniums. The chief difficulty in this work is that most of the fragrant geraniums have been grown for such a length of time from cuttings that they have for the most part lost the power of producing seeds. This makes it obviously difficult to secure seeds from the plants that are precisely the ones it would be desirable to use for the purpose. Nevertheless, I have produced a number of varieties having fragrance, of very attractive new qualities. One of these fragrant varieties is developed from a compact growing Australian form which produces an enormous amount of seed. This fragrant variety, which I have named coconut geranium, has a most pleasing fragrance and is unusually hardy and handsome in growth and foliage. Bearing as it does an abundance of pollen, it was used to pollinate the well-known rose geranium so much used in perfumery, and which never bears seed. But by the use of pollen of the coconut geranium, seeds were produced on the rose geranium by which a whole new series of variously perfumed geraniums are now growing. I also worked at one time in selecting the geraniums for the production of large flowers of dazzling brilliant scarlet color, and with a good measure of success. It will thus appear that there is abundant opportunity for improving the geraniums, even by working with the species ordinarily under cultivation. However, the best opportunity for work in this line will involve hybridizing experiments in which the exceedingly hardy wild species are utilized. It should be possible thus to produce new races of geraniums that have altogether exceptional qualities. The wild species include some that are white in color as well as those that are pink or white striped with pink or with reddish veins. So there is opportunity to have a wide choice as to color variation. The cross might likely result also in giving the geraniums enhanced vigor, so that new graces of perpetual bloomers would be produced. Volume 7, p. 182 to 184. The Practical Essentials of Hand Pollinizing, see pages 5 to 6, gives the details of the simple, yet practical, methods by which hybridizing is accomplished. The diagram below shows the construction of the geranium, and should be of further assistance in your work. It remains only for you to apply these methods to the geraniums you have chosen for your experiment. A. Inflorescence of a geranium, open flower on left showing condition with mature anthers and immature pistil, open flower on right showing condition with mature pistil and faded, defunct, anthers. B. Stamens and pistil from left-hand flower, enlarged. C. Pistil with stamens removed, enlarged. D. Mature stamen, enlarged. E. Mature pistil showing ovary, always included in stamen tube, style, and radiating stigmas, enlarged. Few plants among all the popular favorites have greater merits than the geraniums, and none perhaps offers better opportunities for interesting experiments that may be made by the amateur. Luther Burbank. Old trees made young. What kind of a tree is that? asks a neighbor, as he leans over the fence. Why, it is hardly fair to speak of that as a tree, that is a concentrated, double-barreled prune experiment. If I were to name all the varieties of fruit that are growing on the branches from that single trunks, it would sound like reciting the names from a nursery catalog. Nearly all my important experiments in developing a particular variety of cherry, plum, peachy apple, almond, nectarine, quince, apricot, nut, or timber tree are made, at one stage or another, in these tree colonies. Of course, the average person who inspects my farms has no thought of becoming an experimenter on a large scale, and there would be no occasion to practice multiple grafting and regrafting on any such scale as that employed at the Gold Ridge farm. But I call particular attention to this matter of fruit tree grafting, because there is a lesson in it not merely for the commercial grower of fruity but for tens of thousands of persons scattered across the length and breadth of the country who have in their gardens a few fruit trees, at present of no apparent value, that might be made to bear good fruit in abundance. Moreover, there are other thousands who have on their farms neglected orchards, run riot with weeds and bringing no monetary return whatever, which might be made the most productive and valuable portions of the entire acreage. And in each case the grafting of good varieties of fruit on the old and otherwise worthless stock is the key to the entire situation. Fortunately, the facts of the situation are now being called to the attention of the general public, in particular by the workers at the agricultural experiment stations. Bulletins are being issued that call attention to the possibilities of rejuvenating old orchards, and in many regions results of this work are being manifested in the restoration of these abandoned orchards. In one county in Ohio, in a recent season, 117 rejuvenated orchards added more than 50,000 bushels to the apple crop. In several cases, says the Ohio report, net profit of $400 per acre has been secured from an abandoned orchard. The report continues, it is like reaping where one did not sow to bring one of these orchards into its own again. An investment in one of these orchards is better than gold mine stock, for there is no luck about it. If there is any risk about operations of this sort, it is because of lack of business capacity and industry. Luther Burbank. Volume 3. p. 99-103. There is not space enough here to begin to present the details as to the exact methods of operation through which restoration and rejuvenation of old orchard trees may be brought about. The important questions of pruning, tree carpentry, soil and nourishment, and battling pests are all taken up at length by Burbank in his works. As Burbank states in the foregoing excerpts regarding orchard rejuvenation, the grafting of good varieties of fruit on the old and otherwise worthless stock is the key to the entire situation. Because of this fact, we give in the following pages Burbank's statements of the general principles of grafting and the more common methods, which will afford a foundation for experiments that will prove fascinating and profitable. In one county in Ohio, in a recent season, 117 rejuvenated orchards added more than 50,000 bushels to the apple crop. In several cases a net profit of $400 per acre has been secured from an abandoned orchard. More than 500 kinds on one tree. The direct color photograph on the opposite page shows one of Burbank's cherry trees which has produced as high as 500 kinds of cherries at the same time, this for the purpose of convenient comparison and intelligent selection. Grafting methods that will work miracles. General principles. The single principle that underlies all successful grafting, is that the layer of tissue called the cambium layer, lying just beneath the bark of the twig, shall be brought in intimate contact with the corresponding layer of tissue of the stock on which it is grafted. The life-giving sap flows through this thin layer of tissue only. As to the central woody tissues, the so-called heart of the twig, there will be no union between stock and scion in any case. But this is of no consequence, since the new growth of wood soon covers the trivial wound with which the cambium layer will make ready union under favorable circumstances, and the growth will continue outward, year by year, until ultimately the scion and stock are so firmly joined that they constitute a branch as strong as the ungrafted branches of the tree. But unless the living tissues of the cambium layer are accurately joined, no union can take place, and the graft will be a failure. If this essential principle is borne in mind, the process of grafting becomes a comparatively simple one, and one that may be carried out successfully by amateurs with very little preliminary practice. A few specific hints as to the details of the method may, however, be of service. So I shall give a brief account of the methods employed in my orchards, where the process of grafting is carried out thousands of times each year. Grafting may be divided under three headings. 1. Grafting proper, in which a scion or small shoot is inserted into or upon the stalk. 2. Enarching / in which the scion is left attached to its parent stalk until union with the new stalk is completed. 3. Buddings, which consists of the insertion of a single bud upon the cambium layer of the stalk. There is no fundamental difference between the three processes. They are merely different methods of accomplishing the same purpose. Grafting may be more or less successfully carried on at any time of the year. But during the spring and early summer months, the vital cambium zone is usually at the maximum of activity, forming wood tissue from its inner surface and bark from its outer surface. At this time of maximum growth, wounds are rapidly healed, and union between a scion and stalk is most rapidly secured. Nurserymen and fruit growers take advantage of this fact. The most gratifying results almost always follow spring grafting or summer budding. It is necessary, however, that there should be activity enough in the sap movement to form the cellular connection between the stalk and the bud before the latter perishes from drying out. Sap flow is also necessary to allow the bark to be lifted readily from the cambium for the insertion of buds. The best success usually follows the grafting of mature, or nearly mature, buds in the case of trees and shrubs, though young tender buds often thrive nearly as well. The more common methods. The best and quickest way to graft young seedlings is by side grafting. This graft is made by taking a piece of the new wood from the tree to be multiplied, about 2½ inches long, with well-formed buds on it. Slice off both sides of the lower end of the graft in the form of a sloping wedge, the cuts on each side being not much over 1 inch long. Both sides should be alike, but one of the edges should be thicker than the other. The tree to be grafted is bent to one side with the left hand. With the right hand, a sloping gash is made downward on one side of the tree just above the ground, and the graft, described above, is pushed down into this cut as far as it will go. The cambium layers of the scion and seedling meet at some point, and a union with the tree is formed. After the scion has been placed, the tree is allowed to spring back to its upright position, and is at once cut off with a pair of pruning shears, about 2 inches above the graft. In grafting scions on the branches of trees, as in transforming large trees or whole orchards, the so-called cleft graft is usually employed. In preparing for this, the branch of the stock tree is sawed off at a convenient place, the exact position being determined by the character of the experiment. If we are seeking to make a permanent tree, the graft is implanted upon the limb not more than a foot or 2 from the trunk. But where it is intended merely to test the scion as to its fruiting possibilities, time being an object, it is placed far out among the smaller branches by what is called the tongue, or whip, graft. In sawing limbs over 1 inch thick to serve as stalks, care must be exercised that the limb does not split. In order to avoid this, saw part way through from the bottom, and finish it by sawing from the top. Most persons who graft do not trim the stalk after it has been cut. But I have found that the cambium layers join much more readily if the top of the stalk is trimmed carefully with a knife, so that it is smooth all around the edges. Clean incisions heal best with vegetable as with animal tissues. In making the cleft graft, the stalk is split with a grafting tool. The wedge-shaped portion of this tool is for the purpose of holding the cleft open until the scions have been inserted. The scions are cut and connected with the bark, usually one on each side of the cleft. When the tool is removed, the sides of the stalk hold the scions tightly, so that it is seldom necessary to tie a string or piece of cloth around the graft. It is usually best to put on a piece of cloth, however, after waxing. This ensures more uniform results. Grafting wax, a formula for which will be given presently, is usually applied several inches below the crack which was made for the cleft in which to insert the scions. In some cases, however, the stock will later crack below the point where the grafting V/ax was applied, and when this occurs there is danger of the graft dying. For this reason it is wise to examine the grafts, and where any open crack is found, additional wax should be applied. Grafting wax formula. Mention has been made of grafting wax, as being very generally used to protect scion and stock during the progress of healing and union of tissue. After testing many formulas, I selected the following, and no other has been used for many years. 8 pounds of common resin and 1 pound of beeswax or paraffin, either will do if no acid or alkali is present, though beeswax is generally preferred, are mixed with 1½ pounds of raw linseed oil. Boiled oils often contain chemicals injurious to plant life. If the wax is to be used in cold weather, it is better to use only 7½ pounds of resin and ½ pound of beeswax in the mixture, thus giving slightly thinner consistency. The ingredients are slowly heated together until the resin and wax are melted and all thoroughly combined. This composition, when partly cooled, is poured into pressed tin pans, to make cakes of convenient size for handling. The mixture sticks to the tin with great persistence, but by turning the pan upside down and pouring boiling water over it the wax can be shaken from the pan. These cakes are broken into pieces of convenient size, and in use the wax is kept warm in any convenient dish or pan having a short strong handle. The wax may be heated over a small coal oil stove, and when applied to the grafts should be much warmer than can be borne by the hand, but not hot enough to scald the plant tissues. If heated in a double heater, the danger of overheating is lessened. If applied with care with a small paint brushy first around the thick bark of the stocky and later, as the wax on the brush cools, on and about the cuts and open joints, no harm will result. The plan of brushing the hot wax about the graft, instead of applying it by the fingers in the tedious old-fashioned way, saves 9/10 of one's time, and does far better work than could ever be done by the old method. If the wax should prove to be too soft and sticky, as is sometimes the case in very warm weather, melt it over again with more resin added. If too brittle, add a little more linseed oil so as to bring it to the right consistency to spread well, and at the same time set well on cooling. It gives the most satisfactory results when about the consistency of ordinary chewing gum. Luther Burbank. Volume 2, p. 309 to 322. An apple graft 1 year old. As evidence of the success of Mr. Burhamite's methods in producing quick results, the apple graft illustrated on the opposite page, shown in full hearing after only 1 year's growth, speaks eloquently. When Burbank was just a beginner, the picturesque New England town of Lancaster, Massachusetts, was a rendezvous for ministers, lecturers, and teachers, and was charged to an unusual degree with intellectual activity. Into this environment, March 7, 1849, was born Luther Burbank, the 13th child of Olive Ross and Samuel Walton Burbank. Luther was a quiet, serious child, whose most noticeable trait was a love for flowers that amounted almost to reverence. From his earliest boyhood he studied plants, trees, fruits, garden vegetables, in fact, everything that grew from the earth. But plants did not demand his entire attention. He received an excellent fundamental education at Lancaster Academy, took great interest in chemistry and mechanics, learned the useful trade of carpentry, and for a time worked in a factory near his home. At 20 years of age, Burbank decided that a physician's profession would be most congenial as a life work, and began the study of medicine. However, the death of his father caused him to abandon this purpose. Soon after Samuel Burbank's death the family moved to Groton, now known as Ayer, Massachusetts, and Luther purchased a 17-acre farm in the nearby village of Lunenburg, to be used for raising seeds and garden products. This was the beginning of definite experiments with plants. The Burbank potato, Burbank's most famous product, also his first, was evolved largely by accident in his early experiments on the Lunenburg farm. A rare seed ball of the early rose potato afforded the material which made possible this valuable discovery. Burbank planted the 23 tiny seeds the ball contained and selected one of the resulting plants as possessing the best qualities. In 1875, after 3 years at Lunenburg, Burbank suddenly decided to move to California. 10 Burbank potatoes, retained by their originator and constituting Burbank's most tangible asset in beginning his new career in California, were planted on his brother's farm. And the entire product of the first season was saved and replanted, so that by the end of the second season the stock was large enough to offer for sale. But victory was not won without an heroic struggle and years of persistent effort, for it should be remembered that Burbank was blazing a new path, a path that others may now follow with comparative ease, since he has cleared the